back, everybody. I'm Scott Stevens.
I'm Richard Heating.
And I'm Barb Slutzer.
And
we're the Science Detectives.
With us today on the phone, across the pond, is Nick Pope. He's a rather well-known British ufologist, interested in, all that's going on in the skies, and I guess has been interested in this topic and researching it for various entities for quite some time. So I'd like to introduce you to Nick Pope presently. Welcome, Nick.
Hi, it's good to be on the show.
This is fantastic.
What's some of your backstory? What are some of the agencies that you've participated in research with?
Well, I used to work for the British government. I worked for the Ministry of Defence for 21 years. I only left in October 2006, but from 1991 through to 1994, I ran their UFO project, and my job was to research and investigate any UFO sightings reported to the department to see whether there was anything of any, as we used to term it, defense significance.
And in that 3-year time, did you, was there a lot to look at, or was it kind of quiet?
It was pretty busy. I used to get between 200 and 300 UFO reports each year, so there was quite a lot to be busy.
Wow.
Apart from that, of course, we had inquiries from the media, from our members of Parliament, our political representatives here in the UK. We had all sorts of correspondence from the public, from the UFO community, UFO lobby, whatever you want.
What do you want to call them?
Call that, yeah. So there was never a quiet day.
Nick, I have some questions quickly on this topic since we don't have that much time. During that time, were you able to go back and look at some of the other more famous cases that didn't occur during your time? In that I'm referring to like the Rendlesham Forest case and the ones, what was it, I guess you were on in 93, the ones in March that kind of buzzed over a couple of the RAF bases. What were your conclusions on those?
Well, the March 1993 sightings were right in the middle of my tour of duty, and this was very much the most interesting case that I personally investigated, the so-called Cosford incident. But yes, you're quite right. I was able to delve back into the old archive of UFO files to reinvestigate cases, to reopen investigations if I felt that things had been missed. And so yes, I mean, Rendlesham Forest, which you mentioned, for example, I reopened that particular investigation. I concluded that the original investigation had been mishandled. Information had not been shared properly between the United States Air Force and the British Ministry of Defence. But yeah, I had pretty good freedom of action. I could reopen cases if I wanted to. I could pull all the old files out of the archives. I wasn't constricted in any way.
How far up do the briefings go? I mean, when you have a conclusion, how far up the chain of command do you think your conclusions are shared?
Well, on a couple of occasions, I have briefed this subject to ministers. So we're talking sort of undersecretaries and things like that. On the Cosford incident, for example, on that particular investigation, I drafted, I didn't brief personally, but I drafted something from my head of division, who was a military, one-star equivalent. He was a civilian, but one-star equivalent. He briefed it up to the Assistant Chief of the Air Staff, one of the United Kingdom's most senior Air Force officers. So when we had interesting cases, we could brief up the chain of command, to very senior military personnel, to the senior politicians. You know, I don't think I've ever briefed the Secretary of State for Defence,
right,
but certainly some of the undersecretaries of state. Yeah.
Do you think? What I'm interested is if there is an event, like say the Rendlesham Forest, do the Americans show up right away, or does the MOD get to take lead in that kind of an investigation, or is there a whole nother set of intelligences, black suits if you want to call them, that just show up and then they take over?
It gets really complicated, and with something like Rendlesham Forest, obviously what you're dealing with is United States Air Force bases, but on
British soil.
So you had a very complex jurisdictional situation where you had obviously the legislation that applied was the Status of Forces Act, the NATO SOFA, as it was known, and that led to a lot of confusion, because very often what you would have is a situation where nobody was entirely clear who should be leading, and with something like UFOs, where actually you don't necessarily want the lead because it's an embarrassing situation. Something happens in your airspace and you don't know what it is.
Yeah.
You have this situation where the British are quite keen to say, well, these were American bases, we'll let the US military run with it.
Right.
And the United States Air Force, conversely, are saying, well, of course, we're on British soil, we'll let the Brits lead.
Interesting, because my intuition would have been that the Americans want to jump in and then just control all of the information surrounding that topic.
Yeah, well, yeah, I would have thought that myself, but actually it wasn't the case on this. And if you talk to the senior United States Air Force officers who were involved with this, General Gordon Williams, Colonel Charles Holt, you'll actually find that they were quite keen to pass this off on us.
Interesting.
And let us take the lead.
That is interesting.
Well, when we come back, we'll talk a little more with Nick Pope about his experiences with UFOs and what he thinks is ahead for the public as we head into the 21st century. Back in 2 minutes.